Hello, everybody. Good evening. I am going to go over the social work ethics. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started with that. Again, I am Dr. Hernandez, and this is social work ethics for social work 785, which is school social work research practice and policy. Okay, so the NASW Code of Ethics is the primary ethical guide for social workers, and it includes school social workers. It is complemented by ethical standards from related professionals and associations to enhance ethical guidance for specialty areas such as that in school social work. So NASW standards for school social work services provide specific guidance that pertain directly to issues that are critical to school social work practice that are not addressed in the NASW Code of Ethics. So this guidance includes responsibilities to clients, who is our client, and to the stakeholders, parents' rights and participation, collaboration, decision-making, confidentiality, consent for services, advocacy, knowledge of laws that are within the school district, as well as policies that are national, assessment for school-based services, and contributions to the profession. So these standards complement the values and the principles of the NASW Code of Ethics, and that's what we're going to be reviewing tonight. So NASW has developed supplemental ethical standards for school social workers, and they've basically broken it down into 9 categories. So tonight we are going to talk about those. So we'll review the 7 core beliefs of school social workers, review the supplemental ethical standards, talk about the ethical decision-making process, and finally we'll talk about confidentiality. So the primary belief number 1 is the responsibility is to the student. School social workers hold that these next beliefs that we're going to go over, and that is that we don't hold our primary ethical responsibility to the school. It's not held to the districts. It's not held to parents or teachers. Our primary responsibility, ethical responsibility, is to the students. So learning how to balance this belief between the demands on the school social worker and the role of the school social worker within the school and all of those conflicting ethical issues between the district, the parents, the schools, the teachers, and so on, sometimes be very difficult for school social workers. But we have to remember that the students are first. We work with others on behalf of that student and help the student to be successful in the school environment. Our second belief is the student autonomy and parent involvement. So when children are young, their parents exercise a huge amount of control over decisions that affect their lives. But as they grow older, the youth begin to experience more independence, more judgment, and they can start making choices and decisions that are separate from their parents. So school social workers support the developing autonomy of students, and we want to allow them to make more mature choices regarding their treatment as they move from childhood into adolescence and into adulthood. So it's important for social workers to use a collaborative decision-making process with the student that is supportive of the choices that they can make based on their age, based on their developmental capacity, and based on their mental health. Now, minor students have the right to indicate consent or dissent to school-based services and activities. So consenting with their respective age and development, decision-making ability, and so forth. So basically what I'm saying is that kids have the right to work with us or not. It is completely up to them. They have the autonomy to say, no, I don't want to work with the social worker, and we have to respect that. Parents have the rights, the role, and the responsibility in relationship to their children, and their ability to exercise and fulfill those rights, roles, and responsibilities, which are enhanced by the knowledge and understanding of their children's activities and needs. So We're not saying that we're solely going to listen to the student and not to the parents, because parents know their kids best. And of course, we have to listen to them as well and take what they would like into accountability. As a school social worker, if we have the information and if absent any information and basic contrary to like the beliefs of parents, we seek to act in the best interest of their children. Okay, so we're trying again to act in the best interest of their kids. And what we need to do is balance the students' rights to the privacy, confidentiality, and self-determination, and the primary responsibility that is to promote the well-being of the students at that same time. So social workers must ensure parental involvement is achieved by providing information to the parents regardless of their child's regarding their child's activities, and that they are, occurring, and what the school social worker and the child is doing. But we want to limit the privacy and the confidentiality with that self-determination, and shall equally between the parents and the student. So basically we're saying that we want to make sure we're sharing information based on that client relationship through the social worker to the student. But again, the student is the one that has the ultimate say of what they want to divulge and not divulge, or even work with us or not work with us. I hope that makes sense. So basically, we hold that confidentiality is necessary and it's needed to protect students and families. It includes, but it's not limited to, individual work as well as student group work, as well as home visits or meetings with parents, teachers, and meetings with administration. We can share information with fellow professionals at the school if the information being shared has a legitimate educational interest or is educationally relevant to help support the student or the family within the school system. So basically, we belief number 4 is that children and adolescents vary widely in their maturity and skills related to decision-making, coping, and problem solving. Some may be affected by substance abuse or by a special education disability, or they may struggle with challenges in their mental health. So we have to take mindful consideration of these and other factors in order to achieve the outcomes that are in the best interest of the student and the other stakeholders. School social workers should obtain active or passive consent when providing services to students that is consistent with the state and federal statutes and local education agencies. So active consent is that we actually get signed form that says you have permission to work with my child. Passive consent is that at the beginning of the year, when the parents register their children, they would have paperwork that says, unless you specifically say that you do not want my child to work with a school social worker, they will work with a school social worker if needed. And that is passive consent, because you didn't opt out of it, your kid is automatically placed into it. Right now in Nevada, they're doing active consent in some districts, and some districts they're doing passive consent. Yeah, Clark, it's active consent. So we want to, we also want to make sure that we take into consideration the student's age, their development, again, their mental health, their special education disabilities, any presenting issues when we're trying to determine if the student is able and actually capable to consent to services without prior active consent from the parent. So if we do have passive consent, we want to make sure that the kiddo knows how, that they can actually make that choice on their own. So social workers also hold the following beliefs, is that advocacy is the 5th belief. So you'll see up here where it says advocacy. And basically school district employees and officials are responsible for acting in the best interests of students, both the individual and the collective. And while they are entrusted with their care. But the role of the social worker is to help advocate for the students' needs. So this can become a very huge ethical dilemma that happens a lot, that social workers have to kind of face, is, okay, what is it that we are actually advocating for? Am I advocating for the individual student, or am I advocating for the whole school? So what is it that we're actually doing? And so we do hold advocacy strongly, and our primary focus is on the student, which we identify as the client. That's the one that we want to advocate for. Belief number 6 is the knowledge of laws and policies. So schools have federal responsibilities. They have fundamental responsibilities to help students prepare for life as adults and become contributing members of society. So schools are structured and protected environments where students develop more autonomy as they, move through from preschool to elementary to middle to high school. And so as students grow, what we want to do is help to develop their autonomy. The school social work client relationship is supported and enhanced by that NASW ethical standards of self-determination, which is 1.02, informed consent, which is 1.03, and privacy and confidentiality. So we want to make sure that we're adhering to those. Belief number 7 is an evidence-based practice. So school social workers should always use reliable and valid screening and assessment instruments. They should be competent in how to use them. So you should be trained to know how to implement them and how to score them, how to read them. They should be appropriate for the students and achieve the purposes of the selected screener's assessment. Also, social workers should utilize evidence-based strategies and programs. These strategies can be backed by solid evidence and should be the cornerstone of the school social work practice. It's guiding them and providing the best possible support for students, and they should also regularly evaluate these practices to ensure that they are actually improving their services. So we want to make sure we have our research-based evidence. We're going to look at the patient values. We're going to look at the clinical expertise of the individual school social worker, and from that we form our evidence-based practice. Belief number 8 is contributions to the profession. So it is really part of a very strong belief in school social work that we should take advantage of opportunities to educate others about school social work and our role, function, and speciality of providing social work services and educational systems. Social work has a long history of mentoring others who want to become social workers, such as practicum students or clinical supervision, and social workers learning to provide clinical and mental health services in their postgraduate experience or internships. And so social workers who have experience working within schools should make sure that they make themselves available to, to other social workers who are maybe newer or maybe need some additional mentoring. And the social workers can also help to contribute to the profession by joining state and local associations. So basically, belief number 8, educate others about social work, mentor practicum students and others that need it, and join an association to make sure that you're moving forward with the profession. So we're talking about ethical responsibilities. School social workers, again, operate within this unique context, and it's known as the host setting. What the host setting is this term refers to settings not specifically geared toward social work, such as schools, hospitals, or community organizations. And unlike other social workers who work in settings that are dedicated to social work, such as child welfare or a clinical setting or case management, someplace like that, the primary goal and function of the system in which school social workers are employed is not specifically designed to provide social or mental health services. Schools are there to they're specifically designed to provide educational, academic services. So that's what makes it a host setting. So it's important to understand the ethical responsibility of that social worker who's employed within that educational system, and how do we connect with the schools and speak their language, but also maintain the ethical responsibility of school social work. So the first is that we're always asking is, to whom does the social work owe their primary ethical responsibility? So The educational system is there again to deliver that academic education, and it's emphasizing teaching subjects like reading, writing, arithmetic, right? Science. While social emotional learning has gained importance in the school setting through ESSA, and it's kind of incorporated into the school climate, it's not the primary goal or function of the school. And remembering that at all times when you're in a school, working there will really help you to better define your role and get along with the other mental health professionals that you're working with there. So school social workers who are working in this host setting sometimes find themselves in that ethical dilemma where they are always asking themselves, oh my gosh, who's my client? Or in ethical terms, to whom does a social worker owe their primary ethical responsibility? I have an example of this, so many examples of this, where you're working with the student and you think everything's going well, and suddenly it's not. Oh, suddenly it's not, and the school maybe wants the kid out because, they're just done with everything that's going on. And then that they are not meeting the fate of the student. And so then what do? How do you walk that fine ethical line? So the answer is that our client is the student. It is always the student. It is never the parent. It is never the school. It is never the teacher. It's never the counselor. It is always the student. But we do have to collaborate closely with parents, teachers, and the principals to provide support while maintaining confidentiality, and the principals to provide support while maintaining the ethical responsibility of school social workers. So we can sometimes get confusing when we're trying to identify who the client is, especially when your paycheck and your boss are telling you one thing and what's best for the client is telling you something else. How do you navigate that fine line? And that is a huge ethical dilemma that we face a lot. So our secondary ethical responsibility then is to the stakeholders. And the stakeholders in this case would be the parents, the family members, guardians, school administrators, teachers, and so forth. So these would actually be more of the stakeholders that our secondary ethical responsibility is to. So we're not saying that we don't want to follow the ethics that we need to in order for the school to function. The school's primary ethical responsibility are to the students, plural. So they have to make sure that all of the students there are learning appropriately and doing, what needs to be done to make that happen. And sometimes that is at the sacrifice of another student, because they have 900 kids in their school and they can't sacrifice one for 900. Whereas social workers, our primary ethical responsibility is to that one student that is therefore our client. And that's where the dilemmas can kind of come in together. So unlike social workers who, work in settings that are dedicated to that school social work, it's just remember always that we're in a host setting, and social workers are employed by different things or whatever, but we're providing the mental health services, and our ethical responsibility is always to the kid. So essential steps for ethical problem solving. If we were live class, this would be a break right now. So if you want to pause and come back in like 10 minutes, go right ahead. I'm just going to keep plugging along. So we're going to talk about the ethical decision-making process for school social workers. So basically in our ethical decision-making process, we want to adhere to the NASW Code of Ethics. We want to address records in accordance with the ethical rights of minors and parents. We want to maintain confidentiality of the students, and we want to inform our employers or school administrators or social work ethical responsibilities. So let me show you how that works. So to do this, first we need this ethical problem solvers. We need to determine, is there an ethical issue? So I'm going to give you an example of a case that I'm actually working on right now, and you guys can tell me maybe what the ethical issue is. So I have a student who is in the 8th grade. He is emotionally disturbed. He is in total 100% general education classes and has been doing fairly well. Since being found emotionally disturbed in the 2nd grade, he has always had the tendency of sexually acting out. He would ask girls in the second grade, you know, if you show me yours, I'll show you mine, and then the bully's not going to beat me up, or if you give me candy, I'll show it to you, and would flash others inside of the classroom. He also had a problem with defecating encopresis and enuresis on himself. And so that also kind of started with his issues as to what he's having. So fast forward to 8th grade, and when he was in 7th grade, he was caught in a bathroom at the school with a female student. Nobody knows for sure what they were doing in there, but it wasn't appropriate. This year, he was caught in a bathroom with a male student who is on the autism spectrum. So he is also in all general education classes, getting A's and B's inside of his classes, just like the other student is. And they have known each other since the 6th grade, these two boys, the client and his friend that was caught in the bathroom doing inappropriate sexual things at school. Now, what happened here is that the school is saying that this student should be kicked out of the school and sent to behavioral school because of these ethical things that he's doing, or because of these sexual things that he's doing. But as the school social worker, I review his confidential folder. So I saw his MDT report that shows that he has had these same exact behaviors since 2nd grade. He's just done a really good job since he's been at that school of kind of controlling them. He still has, you know, the sexually acting out, that type of stuff. So it's all throughout his file, his confidential file. In his current individual education plan, it doesn't mention anything at all. There's no behavioral plan to help him with any sexually acting out behaviors. There is nothing in the IEP that says anything about these sexually acting out behaviors. But when you review his confidential folder, it's in every single IEP from 2nd grade, 3rd grade, 4th grade, 5th grade until he got to this school in 6th grade. It's been taken out and he's been doing fine. So the school now is trying to throw him out. So the ethical issue here is what? Basically, would they be violating their faith? If I say nothing about this student and the things that he's doing to the parents and let them know that the IEP is not correct. It's not where it should be in order to help the student to not have these problems that he's having inside of school. So has the school failed him or not? Does the school have the right to just kick him out, or do they need to reconvene his IEP and put in some behavioral plans and things to that nature, see the social worker to learn some SEL skills so that way, you know, he can learn how to better control what it is that he's doing. He's also caught on the internet in chat rooms where he is inappropriate sexual chat rooms where he should not be at the age of 13. These are obviously adults that are in there that are manipulating this child. So then the ethical dilemma is this child a perpetrator or is this child a victim? And if they're a victim, then is it fair to punish him because he was the perpetrator on another child at the school? Now, again, the school isn't being bad. The school principal is saying, I have 1,500 kids at my school, and I have to protect them and make sure that they are safe on school campus and that they can go into bathrooms and not be sexually assaulted or be approached by somebody who's going to try to blackmail them into it or scare them into it. So the principle is, I want the kid out. So the ethical dilemma here is, again, my client is always the student, and I have to do what is right for them. And a free and appropriate public education in the least restrictive environment with an appropriate IEP is what this child should have and what they deserve. So I've determined then that, yes, there is an ethical dilemma. So then you want to identify your key values and principles involved, which I just did. So they're definitely competing values, because I can say absolutely nothing and just allow the process to happen, and the parents aren't going to be any of the wiser, and the child would be expelled from the school potentially, and maybe, possibly, somebody farther up that is reviewing this in a manifestation determination meeting might determine that, yes, the child needs additional help and the school didn't provide it and send the kid back. But when it comes to sexual nature, schools are always, and rightfully so, right, kind of freaking out about it. So the next step then that I have to do after I have that is to then rank the values of my ethical principles. So which in your professional judgment are the most relevant to these issues or to this dilemma? So what reasons can be provided for prioritizing one competing value or principle over another? So for example, your client's right to choose a beneficial, course of action could bring hardship or harm to others who would be affected. And in that case, this is kind of what's happening. So when I'm making my ethical decision, what am I going to do? Am I going to say something to the principal? Am I going to say something to the students? Am I going to, I've gone to this special education instructor facilitator. Her boss, who is a region representative, has already said, kids out. Like, it's got nothing to do with special education. He's acted out sexually. It's got nothing to do with it. I'm telling her I disagree because the IEP and the MDT stated clearly that it is. So where's my rank? What do I think is going to cause the most harm to my client? So I've had 2 weeks now to work with him, and he has a relationship with me. He lies constantly. He's very deceitful. Still has encopresis and enuresis at, age 13. So parents have never been able to find an appropriate person to work with him, and parents feel like I can help them and their child. So I'm giving them hope. So is it more harmful for me to sit back and say nothing, or is it more harmful for me to try to advocate for the student and keep him there at the school? Do I refer the parents to PEP? What do I do? So I kind of rank that on my judgment. And then I have to develop a plan. So developing an action plan that is consistent with the ethical priorities that have determined this central ethical dilemma. So have I conferred with colleagues and clients as appropriate about the appropriate risk and consequences of alternative courses of action? So I have, right? I've talked to other social workers about it and what I think. I've talked to the special education facilitator about it and what they think. I've talked to the parents. I've talked to the student. I understand the difficulty of keeping this kid inside of the school and the potential risk to other students. So what is my plan of action going to be? So I feel like I could justify my action plan when I say that I have to advocate for this student. I don't feel that the school has done a behavior plan appropriately. I don't feel that the school has allowed enough time to work with the social worker. The school has now taken away his Chromebook because he got caught at school surfing the web and in these chats. But the reason he got caught was because as I was talking with him in our one-on-one, it motivated him to come clean because he has a pornography addiction as well because of all of these things that are happening. So he wants help with that and he wants to break the addiction. So he told the school, the safety support officer, that he has these things on his laptop. So now they have found him, and now, again, they want to kick him out. So once I develop my plan, which is that, yes, I'm going to advocate for this student, I'm going to fight like hell to try to keep him there at the school and develop a good plan that I can work with him with. So I'm working on that, and then I need to implement it. So I'm going to utilize the plan, the most appropriate, practice my skills, my competencies. So I'm going to skillfully negotiate, right? I want to make sure I'm culturally competent in what it is that I'm doing. I want to make sure that I am communicating fully to my supervisor, that I am negotiating, what is best for my student while also knowing what is best for the school. How do I get the principal and the assistant principals and everybody who's ready to kick them out to kind of calm down and give it a chance. So that's going to happen actually tomorrow. So I'll let you guys know what happens when we get to class. So I'll know you watched this video if you ask me. So next we're going to reflect on the outcome of this ethical decision-making process. So how would I evaluate the consequences of the process? It hasn't completed yet, so I don't have this, but how were the clients or the professionals, the agencies, how did they accept this? You know, what kind of things are they doing? What further professional training and consultation do I think that the school needs or that I need in order to better help at work with this, or that the family needs in order to work with this? So that is the ethical decision-making process, and how in real life, in a real case, just today, and well, starting 2 weeks ago, that I started kind of working through the different steps of it. So that's a perfect example. I wish we were live because I would love to hear feedback. Okay, so now we go on to the ethical and the legal complexities regarding confidentiality for school social workers. So this is always a hot topic as well inside of the schools, because a lot of school professionals feel like we don't meet FERPA. We, being school social workers, don't meet FERPA, and so therefore they can't share anything with us. And a lot of school social workers feel that they're under HIPAA, which is the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act, and so therefore they can't share information. So how do we balance the needs of the school with the needs of the student? And then how do we maintain confidentiality between the school and outside agencies? And so the best way to do this is to just kind of, you know, again, work through these ethical dilemmas as they come, so that way we can kind of understand these laws and regulations as we're moving forward. So school social workers are actually under FERPA. What is FERPA, and why do school social workers have to follow that law? So FERPA stands for the Family Education Rights and Privacy Act. This is a federal law that was put into place to protect the parental rights, and once a student turns 18, the student's rights to their educational records. And it requires that schools must explain their records fully to the parent, and after the student turns 18, to the student. The parent has the right to seek and to have their students' records amended, and they have the right to have control over the disclosure of the personality, or I'm sorry, of the personally identifiable information that is kept inside those educational records. And then once the student turns 18 years old, or once a student enters post-secondary institution at any age, then the rights under FERPA transfer automatically to that student. So basically, educational records in FERPA include the student's date of birth, their parental information, and, you know, special education records if they exist, disciplinary reports, and so forth. So basically, just about anything that you touch when working with a student is actually protected under FERPA. And so you need to make sure that you remember that. And then FERPA states that the following entities have a right to look at the educational records of the students without the consent of the parent. And as a school social worker, you will never disclose the educational record to any of these entities. You would always refer that entity to your school administrator, as they're the experts, and they know the correct procedure to disclose this information. So if a school official with educational interest wants to see it, or judicial orders, or financial aid offices, and so forth. So other schools that they might obtain. But again, you would never disclose to these. This is going to be up to the administrator. So just know that they can have access to it, but you would never give it to them. The parents have the right to inspect and review the educational records. So if they think that there is something that's inaccurate or misleading in some way, then they have to 45 days to look at this and make corrections if the parents are correct. And the school cannot deny them from doing this. The parent must give the school district written permission to release any information regarding the student to an outside entity. So a release of information, a release of confidentiality, or it's called RFI, release of information, ROF, release of information form. And then they have to have the parent sign it. If you're going to work with an outside agency or provider, when you're referring a student to somebody, if you are doing the referring, you have to have them sign this. You can't just call up the agency and give them the information without that. If the parent is doing it, then you just give the parent the information, and the parent calls the agency, and then you don't need one. Parents have the right to file a formal complaint to the United States Department of Education if they feel that their child's FERPA records have been violated. And if the school is found guilty of violating the FERPA rights, then the federal government can reduce the federal funding to the schools. And so this is why schools are very, very serious about FERPA. And it would be 100% unethical for the school social worker to violate FERPA. So, and FERPA allows the states that schools have certain options and responsibilities. And so, for example, the school must explain and interpret the educational records for the parent. The district can charge the parent a fee if they want to make copies of the records. The school must keep a record for anyone outside of the school that requests a review of the child's records. And so, for example, if a CPS worker comes to the school and they want to talk to the student or they want to review their records, again, that would be at the front office and the principal would say yes or no. It would be a government agency coming in to inspect the records. And so the school must comply. But what they do then is they take a copy of the CPS's badge and, you know, why they kind of like why they're there, and they would keep that in their accumulation folder. If you were to review a student's special education record, you have to comply to this rule as well. And so it has in the record, it has the case log, or I forget what exactly it's called, but you have to write in there if you're reviewing the record. So I would write in there record review by Dr. Hernandez, LCSW school social worker for history, for example, and the date and the time, and then, you know, initial it. So confidentiality is a really important ethical responsibility for social workers. And we're required to maintain confidentiality of our clients unless, as you know, they're hurting themselves or they have thoughts of suicide, someone is hurting them, or they are planning on hurting someone, or they give us permission to speak to someone about what they've spoken to us about. So FERPA states that you have the right to review a student's educational record if you have a legitimate educational interest to do so. And this legitimate educational interest to do so, and keeping things that are educationally relevant, this is where, because it's not clearly defined what that is, this is where the law gets a little bit blurry. And so you may have a school counselor, for example, or sometimes I've never had a CF at the school tell me, but like I've had a school counselor or a teacher just be like, you are able to review these records, right? You're on the list. Yes, absolutely. It is within my scope of practice to review the educational records. I have a educationally relevant interest if it is my client. I cannot review the records just because my best friend's kid goes to the school and I'm just curious about what happens. That would be a FERPA violation. I have no educational relevance to do that. I can't look up a kid at a school for a friend because their kids aren't getting along, right? And give them that information because that would be a FERPA violation. I have no educational relevance to do that. So if the student has been referred to me or the student is involved somehow with a client that I've identified, such as in the case that I talked about before, my client perpetrated on another student, I would have the right to also look at that student's educational records to find out what was happening, what's going on. Do I need to also talk to that other student? What's going on from there? But then what can you share with other staff at the school? And again, this can quickly become another ethical dilemma because you have to maintain confidentiality, right? Unless one of the 4 reasons, right, which we talked about earlier. But FERPA says that we can share educationally relevant information to others in the school if they have a legitimate educational interest in the student. So in the case that I just went over with you, if I have the school principal, right, and this student is telling me a lot of confidential information because I've done, you know, a good job just bonding with him, and so he's just letting all of this stuff out. How much do I tell the school? How much do I tell the principal? How much do I tell the officer, the dean, right? They want to kick him out. How much do I tell the C? How much do I tell his teachers, right? As to like what it is that's kind of going on. And so that's where, again, that ethical dilemma comes in because I have to determine what is educationally relevant that the teacher, for example, needs to know in order to best teach this student. So does the teacher need to know that this kid has had a long history of encopresis and enuresis when it's not happening at home? It's happening at night when the child is asleep? Probably not, right? Does the teacher need to know that in the classroom, the child is using the Chromebook to get onto inappropriate websites and chats? Absolutely, right? Because that teacher has GoGuardian, and that teacher should be watching and should have noticed already that that was happening with the student. Do I tell the teachers that his IEP hasn't been followed and that, you know, we don't have a proper behavioral plan for this kid? Probably not. The teacher doesn't really need to know that. The SEIF would need to know that, the special education instructor facilitator. The special education teacher, who is his case manager, would need to know that so that we can start, you know, making it better. So you can see how certain things that I say are going to be important for who it is. And so you have to make sure that you do that. But is that ethical, right? Am I okay to do that? So let's kind of look at the ethical responsibilities to the client and what do our ethics actually say about FERPA and upholding ethical obligations? Because remember, our ethics say only if the student is hurting themselves or has a plan to kill themselves or has a plan or wants to kill somebody else, or they tell us that we can say something or someone's hurting them. Doesn't say, or if it's educationally relevant. So is it ethical for us then to share that information? So what legally can I share per FERPA while maintaining my ethical responsibility of confidentiality to my client? So let's kind of look into this a little bit more and try to figure out who has a legitimate educational interest. So everything about what can and cannot be said revolves around this legitimate educational interest, but nowhere in the federal law does it define what that is or what that actually looks like. So we got to kind of put our legal hat on here and dig a little bit deeper into the federal regulation so you kind of know what it is that they're saying. So when we look at legitimate educational interest, we're going to start with Public Law 9931. Under what conditions is prior consent not required to disclose information, right? So this is what we're looking for. So under this Educational Code of Federal Regulations, it defines, how does it actually define that? So we're going to say, okay, so this says that an educational agency or institution may disclose personally identifiable information for an educational record of a student without the consent required by 9930, which is the law right above it, if the disclosure meets one of the following conditions. So it says that the disclosure is to school officials, including teachers within the agency or institution with whom agency or institution has determined to have legitimate educational interest, right? Which is what we've been kind of, you know, looking at. So it says we can do it then. B, if it is a contractor, a consultant, volunteer, or other party to whom the agency or institution has outsourced institutional services or functions. May be considered a school official under this paragraph, and then provided that the outside party. So basically, if someone is contracted with the school and the school is allowing them to come in and do something that they would pay someone for, then we can do that. But what can we say to a volunteer? What could we say to a consultant? So we have to kind of know. So we have to make sure that they are performing an institutional service or function for which the agency or institution would otherwise use employees. So if they're contracting out social workers and they would use an employee for that, then the contractor has the right to personal identifiable information about the student and what's going on. It is under the direct control of the agency or institution with respect to the use of maintenance of the education records. So if you have someone who's doing the maintenance of the records, of course, you can disclose the information to them because they would have that. This would not necessarily meet with us because we don't employ this, but they're going to have access to read the record. So they're going to see what everything that you put into their educational records. So remember that too, when you're writing your clinical notes, be very careful what you put into those educational records because you're not the only one who's going to read those, right? Everybody at the school that has access to that student could potentially read it. So you need to be careful because not all of them may have the educational interest that they need to know everything that you're writing. 3 is the subject of the requirement of the 99.33A, right, which is this one right here, governing the use and redisclosure of personally identifiable information for educational records. So this might include a secretary, something like that, that's working on it. So is it educationally relevant for the secretaries at the school to know the sexual inappropriateness of the student? Possibly. Are they in charge of the bathrooms, right? Are they escorting the student from class to class to make sure that he's not, doing this again to another student, right? It all kind of depends. And then last, it says that an educational agency or institution must use reasonable methods to ensure the school officials obtain access to only those educational records in which they have the legitimate interest. So this is where it kind of applies to what I just said. Be careful what you write in their educational record, because lots of people have access to those records, and it could be 3-4 years down the road, and they may not have access to me, and now they're reading that, this is what this kid did, and maybe the kid hasn't done it since then, but now it's all out in the open and there's no explanation. I can't explain it as to what was happening, so be very careful. All right, so now that we understand this part, right, which is what the law says, that who we can disclose information with, we now need to crosswalk that over to the NASW Code of Ethics. It says what it is that we can or cannot disclose. So when we look up our ethics, you'll find this information to be the first ethical responsibility under 1.07 privacy and confidentiality. And basically it says school social workers should respect clients' rights to privacy, and that once private information is shared, standards of confidentiality apply, right? So we have to make sure that we are respecting the client's right to privacy. And then once privacy information is shared, standards of confidentiality apply. And then we go on to B, where it says that social workers may disclose confidential information when appropriate, with valid consent from a client or a person legally authorized to consent on behalf of the client. So basically, this is kind of saying that we have to have valid consent from the client, legally authorized to consent. So does this section help us with the FERPA federal regulation? So sort of. It says that we can share private information, but that we need to maintain confidentiality standards, and we can disclose it, but we have to have permission to do so. But that's not what FERPA says, right? So this doesn't solve the ethical dilemma. If anything, it makes it worse, right? Because this is saying, keep your mouth shut, you're not saying a word, right? So let's keep searching. So when we look at section C of this, it goes a little bit further, a little bit deeper, and it says we can protect confidentiality except for compelling professional reasons, and that as social workers, we should disclose the least amount of confidential information necessary to achieve the desired purpose. So it goes on to say that we share information that is directly relevant to the purpose for which the disclosure is made should be revealed. So this helps us a little bit more, right? Because this one is saying that, again, we're protecting the confidentiality of information. The general expectation of social workers will keep information confidential does not apply when disclosure is necessary to prevent serious, foreseeable, and intimate harm to clients or others. And in all instances, school social workers should disclose the least amount of confidential information necessary to achieve the desired purpose. So how does this help with our ethical dilemma of confidentiality? So what can I share with the teacher, with the school counselor, the administrator, the custodian, or the office staff? To do that, we still have to determine whether the person has the right under FERPA to have this confidentiality referred to them. And if so, what is educationally relevant to the custodian, right, for this kid? So in this case, FERPA states that if we have educationally relevant information about a student, we can disclose this information. It is not unethical to do so, because our ethics say that we can, as long as we stay within the guidelines that are set. So what we tell the teacher, for example, is just enough information so that he or she can make decisions on how best to support the student's academic success, but we do not tell them all things that are not educationally relevant. So I have another little scenario here, just to kind of go through and kind of help muddy the waters even more. So you have just finished your social emotional assessment with Sam. This is Sam. And during your assessment, you learned that Sam's mom lost her job and his dad was recently in prison. And Sam is worried because when he came home from school the other day, there was a big red notice on the front door and the lights will be turned off. Sam's mom is crying most nights, but she thinks Sam is asleep and cannot hear her, but he does because he has problems sleeping because he's worrying so much about his mom and his dad. And Sam also reports to us that he is hungry on the weekends because he only eats at school. His mom's just really having a hard time. So based on this, right, what can we tell educational professionals at the school and what is educationally relevant? So after the assessment, the teacher comes up to you and they're like, hey, what's going on with Sam? You know, his teacher's really concerned about him because his behavior just seems to be getting worse in her class and she's at her wit's end and thinks he's just attention seeking. He wants power and control over every situation because it's just become so argumentative and she doesn't know what to do and she's asking you for help. So in this scenario, what do you tell the teacher, right? How much do you tell the teacher? What is educationally relevant? What is not? So in this particular situation, you could tell the teacher something like this. So I understand your concern for Sam, and he really is going through a rough time at home right now. He is having difficulty concentrating and his nerves are causing him to have an upset stomach. So he's having difficulty eating at home and sometimes at school. What do you think might you be able to do to support him a little bit more in your class while I work with him on developing his social emotional learning skills so he can learn some better coping skills for his nerves? So why don't we work together and we can develop a plan of care so that we're both kind of on the same page. Does that sound good to you? Right. So that might be something that you would say to the teacher. So I didn't tell her that dad's been incarcerated. The kid is probably going to tell her anyway, but I didn't say it. If the kid tells it, that's him breaking confidentiality, not me, right? I didn't tell her that mom, is having a hard time paying the bills. I'm going to work with mom in order to do that, right? Because this is the teacher. What she does need to know is that he's having a hard time sleeping, which might be why he's grouchy. He's having a hard time eating, which could also be why he's grouchy. And there's a lot of stuff going on at home right now that is causing him to really worry and giving him great difficulty in concentrating in the class. This is going to get the teacher's wheels going and she'll have little aha moments and be like, oh, okay, I know exactly how I can help Sam, right? So by explaining this to the teacher, we've told her what is educationally relevant to Sam, and we followed FERPA, and we followed our own ethical values of keeping his confidentiality. We did not tell the teacher the things that were truly, truly private. Now, if this wasn't the teacher and this was the school counselor, and this school counselor is in charge of the backpack program, so I can get Sam food for the weekends to take home because he's reporting that he's only eating at school, he's not reporting at home. Then she might need a little bit more information because she has a different role that she's filling as a school counselor. So she may need to know that, yeah, the family's having a hard time, they can't pay the lights, they're going to shut it off, I'm helping them with that. But mom's also having a problem with food, I'm going to give her information to the food banks, but we need to sign him up for the backpack program, and maybe there's some school stuff or whatever that we can work with. Or if that counselor actually does a grief group for students of incarcerated parents, again, educationally relevant, right? We would let her know that then so that he could join her group. So it's all going to depend. So basically, the following of these are not confidential records. So your personal notes, such as private notes about the student. So when I say be very careful what you write in his educational record, that's an Infinite Campus or any type of like electronic record that the school is using for their educational record. That is part of his educational records. My personal notes and records that I keep for him are not. So law enforcement or campus security records, they're not educational records. His health records are not educational records, and employment and payroll information is not educational records. However, health records and mental health records kind of fall under this other thing called HIPAA, or at least you would think that it would. So HIPAA very quickly is basically the Health Insurance Portability Education or Accountability Act of Education, Accountability Act of 1996. And basically it prohibits private and privacy and security for your protected health information, your PHI, right? HIPAA does not normally apply to K through 12 school student records or considered part of the educational record and are not protected by HIPAA. So basically what this is that schools are not, they don't normally comply to HIPAA, and the same goes for us. The student health records, the records are educational records. They're not protected under HIPAA. So whether HIPAA or FERPA applies in Nevada. So basically I've already told you that in our resource section underneath the laws, you'll see that there's a joint regulation or a joint letter that came out that really explains FERPA and HIPAA, and it doesn't apply to K through 12 schools. It does apply to secondary schools. So to like UNLV, HIPAA applies and not FERPA when it comes to your health records. Okay, so basically if you're a school and you have school-based health services provided by clinically licensed professionals, it's still not covered by HIPAA. I'm a clinically licensed professional, but my school-based mental health records are still covered by FERPA, not by HIPAA. The school transmits electronic health records for Medicaid payment, then they become a covered entity. So right now we're not billing Medicaid. So the notes that I have are strictly FERPA protected. Once I start inputting it into electronic health record for Medicaid payment, and I'm keeping track of everything on there, now it becomes covered by HIPAA. The school maintains mental health records in the student's health record. So it's not covered by HIPAA, but by FERPA is what the federal government had decided. So this one right here again kind of talks, it's a cute little slide here, whatever, that kind of talks about the difference between HIPAA and FERPA. So it kind of goes through like, you know, what the Family of Education Rights Act and who must comply to it. It tells you what is the protected information and who is permitted to disclose it. I've already kind of gone over this. This is just like an extra piece for you guys to look at. And then it talks about HIPAA, and who is covered by it, who is not, and what records are actually covered by it. So it kind of does the same exact thing. So you guys can go back into that. It's on the CDC and it has the HIPAA website right here, and then the FERPA website. So you can find that on there. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to talk about is just the confidential practices among agencies. So basically school officials must obtain prior written notice of the parent or from the parent, basically consent of the parent or where applicable the student before requesting form or disclosure. Okay, so basically I'm just saying in here that, you know, you have to have permission in order to disclose it before you can send anything out to an outside institution. We already kind of talked about that. It is acceptable to discuss the situation of a particular student with an outside professional, for example, during like professional development, LCSW supervision, case consultation, if the communication is conducted in a manner that protects the identity of the student and the family. So the story I just gave you was true, but I gave you no names. You have no idea what school he's in. You don't know his, you know his age, but you don't know his race. You don't know anything else about him. So it would be impossible for you to find him. And then confidential information received by the school that was not requested or needed should be included in the student's record and should be returned to the sender or shredded, right? So if we get information that we didn't ask for, we're like, oh my gosh, did you ask for this? No, you asked for it. No, shred it, put it in their confidential record, or, fax it back to the sender. All right, and that is all that I have for you on tonight on ethical decision making. This was from week 3. Sorry, it's a little bit late. I also have some supplemental documents that are in the resources here that you guys can go through that just kind of helps with everything that I talked about inside of here. There's a lot of legal stuff that was talked in here, and so I also have different works here that are cited that I don't normally put at the end of my presentations. So that's everything that I have for you right now. I hope you guys enjoy the presentation and you have questions. I want to meet with you at our next class meeting. You all have a good night. Bye.